All right. As you all listened to this podcast about legislation and an interview with my son, we had a problem when we went back to listen to it that the microphone, something had happened and it wasn't picked up by the microphone. It was picked up by the computer. So the sound quality is not going to be as good. And we decided not to redo the whole interview because we just did it kind of off the cuff. It was very casual. So, we'll just, we'll redo it another conversation at another time. But for right now, we decided to let this one go. So I hope you'll enjoy it. Thank you. So today, we're here interviewing my son, Garrett Burns, who is legal counsel for Representative Paul McMurtry, who filed the Benzo bill for us at the Massachusetts State House. How odd is this, Garrett, that you actually get to talk? Usually you're in the background doing all the stuff because your mother's very dumb with the computer stuff.
Yeah, it's strange to be on mic for the first time and not be staring at the computer screen through the whole show.
Constantly checking me to make sure I'm doing everything right.
Giving me hand movements, saying that you're talking too fast, things like that, yeah.
Because we know I do talk too fast. So I'm going to give a little background before you and I get talking, if that's okay, because you're the boss.
Sounds good.
So you've worked for Representative Paul McMurtry for a little over 5 years now, and not only is he your boss, but he was a family friend before you ever even started law school. In fact, when you were in law school years ago, I had my first conversation with Paul that something had to be done about the benzodiazepine problem. And he didn't even hesitate with his concern for what I was telling him. He was still, he was just that, he just really listened. That's all I can say. And I was still pretty ill at the time. So he told me to write something up for what I was looking for at the time, but I was too sick to do anything and really didn't even know what to do. So let's fast forward to now. You're working for him. The subject comes up again. This time you sat down with me at the kitchen table and said, "What are you looking for?" And here's what I said to you. Remember what I said to you? I wanted informed consent. I wanted short-term reason, short-term prescription, a symptom-guided taper, and more than anything, I said I didn't even want to even do anything if people who are already on benzodiazepines were not protected. Either they had the choice to come off if they wanted to, or they could stay on because they've been on them for a long time now. So you want to talk about that experience when we first sat down at the table?
About how we actually got the bill
from
point one to where it is today.
Yeah. How does it happen?
It really was just kind of an after-dinner conversation, and I know that the conversation had started with Representative McMurtry when I was in law school, but it's a difficult thing to have a conversation about something that he doesn't have any personal experience with, and then for him to leave that conversation and go develop legislation on his own. So the fact that I go to work for him when I leave law school years later, it puts somebody in his office that has firsthand experience and knows what a bill should look like that would help the community of people that are looking for help from legislation. Okay. So that really, what the beginning was just, us having a short conversation about, what are the broad strokes of a bill that would help you. And I think maybe it was like that week I went and had a conversation with our own in-house counsel that helps you develop legislation, and that was the beginning of the bill.
Okay, so now the bill gets done. Now, actually, before we even get into that, if somebody's listening to this and they're in a state that has not filed legislation, what's the process? What can they do if they want to try to make a change in their state?
So I think the first thing somebody could do right away is go and have a conversation with their representative and just tell them what's going on. Now, what I think is best is that you find a representative or a senator or a legislator that really understands the issue, because your representative may want to help you, but not understand the issue. At the end of the day, they might be a lawyer or an accountant somewhere in their lives, and they don't have the background for it. But if you found somebody who, say, was a doctor that became a legislator, or a nurse, or somebody who just somebody in their family that has dealt with these drugs, then that's kind of the person that you would want to go to.
Yeah, that's actually a very good suggestion.
And usually your representative could help you link up with that kind of a person, so they're part of the conversation too.
So when you say rep, you're saying representative. So in every state, there's the House, which is House of Representative, and the Senate, which is the Senate House. So so I did not go to my senator or my representative. Paul is from another town, so people don't necessarily have to go to the one that they're the constituent for, right?
You don't have to, but I would say courtesy would dictate that the first conversation is with your representative that you are their constituent. And then if you want to branch out after that, where say they don't really understand the issue, or they do, but they're not the right person to file the bill, then you go and have that second conversation with somebody else.
Okay. So now the bill gets written. You guys, it then goes to House Counsel, because you wrote it up. I remember seeing it. It looked good.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the first one we're talking about. And then it went to House Counsel, where it changed. And I remember I panicked when I saw it, that there would be like strict guidelines, and you don't want that. So, but you had said that amendments can be filed, not to panic, don't worry. We just wanted to get through the stages. What are the stages?
Yeah.
What happens?
I mean, we've never gotten to that point where we need to offer an amendment yet, because we've never gotten it out of committee. But
wait, let's go back. Explain out of committee. So the process is we file the bill. The bill then waits for a hearing. We go for the hearings.
So I think to just kind of give a quick background on how those things happen, bills are filed in two different ways. They're either filed seasonably, which means that they're required to get a hearing, or they're not filed seasonably, which means the committee never actually has to take the matter up. So the first time that we actually did it, we filed it unseasonably because we did it so quickly. It was after the legislative filing period, and the committee was just nice enough to hear our bill, and they heard it alone, which turned out to be a good thing, because I think that first hearing was 3 or 4 hours long of people coming up and testifying, which I don't know if I ever expected that. And so that was the committee's first look at it. And so I didn't really have much hope for it leaving the committee favorably, because they had such a limited amount of time with it.
And do you think it's because it's about a medication that's been around for a long time?
Yeah, so I think the first hurdle is definitely that Mass Medical does not support it, the bill. Still don't support it today. But what I would say is we have submitted so much testimony, so much anecdotal evidence that it's hard to ignore. So I think that just thinking in common sense, where there's smoke, there's fire. So it's worth taking a closer look at it. So the legislature receives over 6,000 bills a year, and this is just one of them.
And about how many bills pass a year, if you had a guess?
So a lot of bills pass, but usually they're smaller matters. They're like liquor licenses or sick leave banks and things like that. So as far as substantive bills, there's really only a handful that get through every year. And so that's why it's difficult. Even a bill with merit, when I think this bill has a tremendous amount of merit, may not get its opportunity simply because the legislature doesn't get to it. There's too much to deal with in any given session, which is roughly 2 years long.
So let's go back to that first hearing, because that was it was the first time you had that many benzo people in one room.
Yeah,
it was.
I was nervous that day.
I'm even choking up myself when I think about it. Let me pull myself together for a minute. It was so powerful. I mean, tears and stories, and it was unbelievable. So you've always seen my story. I mean, you've seen the phone calls come in, but you actually got to see these people get up, and it was unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, so I think part of the reason that I was nervous that day was, well, one, because you were going to be the first person testifying, and I think it's difficult, it's anytime that you tell a personal story, and you really told a story about what it was like being in this house when I was younger, and, financial problems because of the drugs and everything, it's hard to have that said out loud in front of everybody. But it seemed like you set the stage with that first one when you went up with Representative McMurtry, and then everybody followed suit, which was awesome. But, leading up to that day, I kind of didn't know what to expect. And, working in the legislature and being legal counsel, I'm in those committee hearings, a couple times a week. So I'm used to being in there, and I never really know what to expect. And with this one, I didn't know if 2 people were going to show up and we were going to be out of there in 15 minutes, or like people were going to show up and maybe be a little bit angry, because things like that can happen sometimes. And, just because it's such a personal issue, but it really wasn't. It was just people getting up there and really pouring their hearts out and telling their personal stories, and not really even for their own benefit, because, that legislation could have passed right there that day, and it really wouldn't have helped any of the people in that room. No. They were doing it for other people.
Right, we're doing it to save others, yeah. Yeah, had you ever seen, the amount of emotion that was in that room that day, had you ever seen that in a meeting before? Because that was, I think I cried almost through the whole thing.
Yeah, there are other bills that, affect families personally, and people do get emotional. Even so, our biggest bill to date that we've actually got passed was the Tobacco 21 bill that we passed here in Massachusetts, and that was filed by Representative McMurtry too. And so our office did a tremendous amount of work on that. And those hearings get emotional too, because you have people getting up and telling stories about their kids that get hooked on cigarettes at 14 or 15 years old, and they develop cancer and they died, and they feel like they've been taken advantage of. So I mean, this one definitely was more personal to me. So I would say personally being emotional, this was that was definitely the biggest one for me. But yeah, we definitely have other hearings that are like that.
Yeah, I mean, the people that showed up that day, that I was shocked. In fact, there was one of the moms that showed up whose son had committed suicide. We didn't even know about her, that she would come, but her daughter out in Colorado had heard about our hearing out in Colorado and had the mother come about her son, that had been affected. I mean, just story after story after story. It was like, so I think knowing what goes on in the State House, that even the governor's opioid bill took 3 times before it passed, I in my heart, I thought, how can they not pass it? But I knew not to get too excited. So now we go in for a second time. And before we even talk about the second time, the doctors come in to speak against us. That's always that kind of, I think, for all of us, because I went up first, and then the doctors came up behind me, and then came the testimonies of all the people. And of the 5 doctors that came to speak against us, only 1 stayed to listen. The other 4 left, which I thought, how could they do that? That was such a slap in the face and so shocking. It almost makes you want to just keep going even more. That, listen to but the drugs that you're prescribing. And the one who did stay behind, I went up and shook his hand and I thanked him for being there, and listening to the stories. In fact, there was another doctor that didn't come with them. She came, she had heard about it, and she came up and spoke at the very end. And she said she was coming to speak totally against it, but after hearing everybody's stories, it really got her thinking. And she also used the Ashton Manual, which was interesting. She's holding the Ashton Manual based on, what we've all done these years.
Yeah.
So that was interesting. Now comes, you have to file again. And going to do it again. We did it, how soon after? I think you filed, so we spoke, I think, in April the first time. And then it's filed again that following January, and we spoke, I can't even keep up with when we've gone in. So the second hearing, we go in again. I think we had a pretty good response.
Yeah, so, I mean, the first thing I'll say, too, because we were talking about the panel of doctors, I know people got, upset when they gave their testimony against the bill, but I feel like you can't have a full discussion without hearing the other side.
Absolutely.
So I appreciated them being there, and if anything, it showed the committee, like, what we're dealing with. Like, this is their standpoint on things, and then they don't even stand by it and stand in the room and listen to what everybody has to say. Yeah. They got up, they read their statements, and left.
Right.
So, I mean, I think that says a lot. And then, as far as it going to the second hearing, so the second hearing is the first time the bill is seasonably filed, so that it was required to get a hearing this time around. So we knew it was going to be heard.
Yeah, but the first time it goes to study. So nothing happens. It just goes to study. They'll look into it, and we have to file again. Okay.
And again, the committee just didn't really have enough time to look at it. It was really something where it was, let's hear it. It was more of a thank you to Rep. McMurtry and his relationship with the chair there, that they heard the bill. And so it was great that we got the bill heard. But now this next time around, it's the bill seasonably filed. We have a lot of information to send to legislators, which we were doing kind of throughout the session, where we would send things to their email and saying, we appreciated your support the first time around. Here's some more information to look at. And we got a lot of support. And the difficult thing that happened that time is the chair of that committee changed. So it's not the same staff, it's not the same chairperson, it's a whole new look at the bill again.
And I liked it because the chair was a nurse.
Right.
Yeah, that was actually very good for us.
The difficult part is kind of continuity, as far as, okay, well, we heard it the first time, we know what to expect. You could see the changes that we had made in the bill, where we kind of slimmed the bill down a little bit, and it was more just focused on the informed consent this time around.
But the one big error that happened, we were all told to look at it, and yet I had looked at it so many times I didn't look at it, was the part about protecting any long-term users got left off. But again, an amendment could be filed if it was going to go further. So,
and I wouldn't even say could, it would be.
Yeah.
And that would be something that we would deal with as it was starting to move along in the process where legislation is bouncing back and forth between the House and Senate.
Mm-hmm.
But again, we've never kind of gotten to that point. And even if it was to leave the House, if it passed the House, we would find it like a Senate counterpart to file an amendment. We just wouldn't support it leaving the Senate until it had that amendment in it.
Okay. So now that goes to study.
That went to study as well.
That went to study. But the one good thing that came out of it, the chairwoman, who was a nurse, the governor was then having his opioid meeting. And I get called to come in and speak at the opioid meeting about the benzodiazepine. So we at least get to put that in there. So that was, I had to go in, I think that was in January of last year. So now we file a third time.
Right.
And the bills are all exactly the same, and so we go in a third time, and I always get nervous we're not going to have enough people show up. And it was a very emotional hearing this time. Again, we had somebody who not only was he a benzo victim, but his sister had committed suicide, who was a drug and alcohol counselor who didn't even understand that the drugs she was on till the end. She was just learning. We had some very, very emotional testimonies. I'm going to be having some of them on the podcast show. So right now we're at the point we're just waiting, correct?
Yeah, and I think sometimes people feel like they leave a hearing room and that's the end of the bill, that you're just waiting for it to either go to study or for them to kill it in committee or to move it on, and that's really not the case. I see it more as a beginning. So more conversations are had, whether it's the committee reaching out to me or them reaching out to Representative McMurtry, or they're doing kind of their own due diligence on the bill. And again, so from second hearing to third hearing now, we also have another new chair, so new staff again, new chair again.
Mm-hmm.
So all the different chairs and different staff people that move into the mental health and substance use committee, they have their own ways of doing things.
Right.
So we have until January, really. And it's October right now as we're recording
January to get a decision?
For them to move the bill out. And so, we're hopeful that something happens this time around.
So before we move on I want to get into some personal stuff. Letters, when people write letters. The first year you were getting letters from all over the world. Mm-hmm. But it's really important to get letters from Massachusetts, correct? So the first year I think you got inundated with letters.
Yeah, so inundated from letters from Massachusetts, from all over the country, all over the world, and they're all great. But again, this is a Massachusetts bill,
right?
And legislators move based on their own constituencies.
Right.
So the letters help from outside of the state, but
right. And then we had to do letters the second time, and it's important to have fresh letters, mm-hmm. even if it's from the same people. Did the amount of letters cut down?
Yeah, because I think if you don't work in politics, I can see how you lose a little bit of steam. Mm-hmm. As we filed it a few times, and I feel like, well, it's never going to happen, and that's not the case. That there, like we've already said, there are plenty of good bills. It's not a matter of whether they're not going to pass or not. Sometimes it's just a matter of, do we get to it? Does the committee spend enough time on it?
Right. Now, third time, I think that was the least amount of letters. You think?
Yeah.
So instead of building up, we're losing letters. I think we got more from it was more Massachusetts centered, correct?
Yeah.
But people, saying they were going to write letters, but they didn't. Just take your letter from the first year, copy it, send it. But we didn't get that. Can they still submit letters? Is that even important at this point?
Like I said, the committee's still looking at it. The bill is sitting in committee, so that means that they're still working on it. So letters can come in at any time.
Yeah. And Sonia Stivelo, who has been amazing helping, and she got her senator to also file the same bill. So it was filed in the House and in the Senate. Sonia's been fantastic. I couldn't do this without her. Like each year, Dad's been sick, so she's taken over doing a lot of stuff, trying to get people to contact their representatives, their senators. Is that still really important now for them to go and have that conversation with their rep and senator?
Yeah, and I think education is the most important thing. Unless you know somebody personally, there's kind of no reason for you to look into this kind of thing. Regardless of how many emails I send out or information I send on a bill, it really it hits home when somebody can walk into your office and say, like, this is how it's affected my life, and I live in your district and I need your help.
Right. And is there any way somebody should talk to somebody? Like, don't come in angry because they didn't do it. We are all angry when it happens. So I took my anger and I tried to do something with it. So they should go in what sense? Call and make an appointment first.
Yeah, call, make an appointment. Definitely, I would say don't go in with any anger or anything like that, because it may be the case where you don't even get to speak to your representative. You might be meeting with their chief of staff
Right.
or whoever it is, and it's just you trying to get your information to them.
Right.
And opening up a line of communication in case anything else ever is happening and you need them to support something else that's going on, and that's the way I would look at it.
Right. So some are too sick to get in. I would have been too sick to go into the State House, but most representatives or senators have local offices, or can it be done over the phones? For instance, the day when we just had our last hearing, Jen Niles went and spoke to her, was that her representative or senator that was on the committee? She actually, her person was on the committee. So she had that conversation with her first. She was educating her. Now she's at the hearing on the committee. So that's good for us that, she's got that personal touch. So you don't necessarily have to go in. Like I said, somebody in New Jersey did it from her sick bed, contacting her legislator. Bill was written, bill was filed. She's never left the house to go do a thing. So you can take action without being in person, correct?
Yeah, you don't have to come to the State House, and I would say a lot of these legislators probably appreciate not having to, because it could be that you're from Western Mass and it's a 2-hour drive.
Right.
It's a 2-hour drive for your representative as well, so to meet them in the district or just have a cup of coffee or
and that's what Sonia did.
Yeah.
Sonia went and had a cup of coffee with her senator. I mean, there are ways to do it. So, all right, so I want to, let's now get into, is there anything else on legislation that you want to say?
No, I think we covered it pretty well.
All right, so now we're going to get into some real touchy stuff.
Okay.
So where you are the son of a mother who was on Ativan, and I was put on Ativan when you were about 4 years old. 4 years old. You were almost 4. And, that's when my life changed. So I went from working full-time mom to I'm home. And I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm getting sicker and sicker. So...
Oh, the only thing that I would add to the legislative part of it is we didn't talk about all the hate letters that we got.
Oh, I wanted to mention that. Yeah. So tell people, you got some pretty nasty hate mail into your... Was it directed at you or to... Actually, it was directed to Paul McMurtry, Representative McMurtry.
Both of us, because I think my name got out there somehow as being like the person who wrote the bill, and obviously Representative McMurtry's name is on the bill. And I think you could probably speak to this better, but you could understand where people's fears come from when a bill like that comes out, because you feel like maybe we're trying to take your medication away from you.
And that's the one thing I wish people understood. If it were me and I was still on Ativan, I would freak out if a bill went in to stop the drugging. There are people on the internet, they want benzos banned. No, they have their place. They have their place in medicine. I think we're all different genetically. But if I was still currently on them, no one has a right to take me off. I mean, especially when you can't function without them. There are people on them for 10, 20, 30, 40 years at this point. So that bill was actually to protect people. Here's another reason we did the bill. Because we were seeing around the country, you just go into where your doctor's office was and a sign was up, no longer prescribing, and they'd mention all the benzos. And people are being cut off. I mean, it's crazy. So we're actually trying to protect people on them. I don't want to make any more new victims, short-term reason, short-term prescription. Symptom-guided tapers, again, because doctors do not know how, the majority, I'm going to say majority, doctors do not know how to taper people properly. And then if you want to remain on them, we've had people in their 70s. I had somebody call me one time, his doctor retired, a new younger doctor came in, and he wanted all patients off of benzos, just like that. And this is years ago before legislation ever came up. I said to him, go talk to a lawyer, have the lawyer write up a thing that you'll never hold him accountable for the fact that you're on him. He said, I have a good life. I golf, I'm retired. I see the horror stories. I want to stay on it the rest of my life. And I believe the younger doctor just was going to let him stay on it.
Yeah, and I think, so it's hard to read a piece of legislation and read into it all that intent behind it.
Right.
Which is why every time I or Paul got a piece of hate mail, I wrote them back and I said, anytime that you want to speak to me about the legislation, I'm a public employee. You can call my direct line and we'll talk about it.
Right.
And nobody ever did, so... I still would follow up with an email and say, this is really the intent of the legislation.
Yeah.
My favorite one was when they said, you're a dime a dozen lawyer. How could you tell me how to take my medication? If you knew anything, you would have become a doctor. And
yet what they didn't know was more than anything, I wanted anybody on them protected. I said to you, look, we will stop doing legislation if anybody on them is harmed. Because I saw that happen in England. When things started to go out public in England years ago, doctors started cutting people off. We can't have that. You've got people on these drugs for a long time. That has to be their decision in the end. So, yeah, that was a good point because I forgot about that.
But the hate mail has stopped now with the last 2 sessions, so that's good.
But and you'd think you'd get more hate mail because the part about protecting long-term users got left off accidentally. So they look good for anybody listening. And I know a lot of people are shocked when I say I'm not against benzodiazepines after all I went through and what I've lost. But we have to realize that there are people petrified to fly. And, they might take a benzo just to get through the flight. Or, if there was a horrible crisis or a death, we know a lot of people, they can't handle that. No one's taking that away from you, So anyway, so let's get back to growing up in a house with a mother who's slowly changing and becoming crazy.
Yeah.
And I mean, I like to make fun of myself.
Not crazy. Let's not use the word crazy.
True, but I when we were younger, I would think I was very open about everything. So you were about 4, when I got put on, so you don't really know a lot then. But as I'm on them, I'm changing, and I can remember one time we were driving somewhere, and I had to turn around, and you're like, "Is it my fault?" It's like because the Ativan, I don't even understand interdose withdrawals, and I'm intolerant. I don't know what's happening to me. But as you're getting older, all right. So now let's get into your years when you're older and you've got friends, and I can't drive you anywhere because I have become agoraphobic. Mm-hmm. But this kind of became the fun house,
right? So I think in the past when you've talked to people over the phone, or you had people talk to me over the phone about, how did you deal with it, mm-hmm. Growing up. And, I don't want to say like I was shielded from it, but because you were so willing to do everything in the house or right outside, it made it easier. So I never had to go, far away to a friend's house because you were the first person to jump in and say, hey, but they can all come to this house. So they can have a sleepover. There's video games. They can play street hockey.
Oh, we're going to make, 3-foot subs. And okay, today we're doing burgers and hot dogs. School vacations. All the kids came here. Street hockey out on the street.
I think the only time I ever really kind of noticed anything, it would be like, growing up. I would have hockey games every Saturday and Sunday, and my mother was never there.
Right.
So the first time, then I tell this story, in my office sometimes when people ask about, the benzo bill, the first time you ever come to a hockey game of mine, I'm 27 years old, playing in a beer league hockey tournament, and I'm waving at you from the bench, and I'm sure everybody thinks I'm like this weird guy that still has his mom come to his hockey games.
I think I did make it to one. I think I did make it to one. So all the years I'm actually on the drugs, though. All the years I'm on the drugs, and I still don't know I'm sick. I could do little things, but I'd have to keep up dosing. And my doctor's like, just go higher. And then I could function for a little bit till I reach tolerance again. And I remember right when I had found out that when my new gynecologist told me that the Ativan, I was on one of the most addictive drugs ever made after my hysterectomy, I thought, okay, we were leaving for Florida. And when we were in Florida, again, I had updose just to go because the 2.5 wasn't working anymore. I go to 3 milligrams. And we were out one night. I think it was you that said, Mom, you ruin everything. Yeah.
So I don't have any memory of that.
Yeah, but it was true, and I thought I am ruining everything. I mean, life wasn't perfect. I don't want people to think it was all fun and games around here, but I did try to give you guys a good upbringing. I wasn't the mother I always thought in my head I was going to be when I was younger, but we didn't lose that relationship. But then when I learned the Ativan was my problem, I remember sitting down and telling you kids about it. So you were 14, Leanna was 10. And I felt like you had to understand what was going to go on because I was trying to do a little research. There wasn't anything. There was no information back then. So you actually helped me on the internet. You found information. You found CETA in England for me. And that was Pam Armstrong's organization. That was my first information that came over. And I was in tears. So now you were both well informed. I'm going to feel sick. And as that taper started, and I knew nothing about tapering, and there was no information. I was doing it very fast and very hard, and I was very sick. So do you remember back then?
No, I mean, it's hard to have a vivid memory of that stuff at this point, but I would say because you did have I remember having those conversations about what's going on with you, and that, you know, you're not crazy, but you were on a medication and you're trying to come off. It kind of forced me and Leanna to, you know, become emotionally intelligent at a younger age. So,
I think we hid a little bit more from Leanna than you. You were very mature for your age and very kind. When I would just be crying or acting, I got vicious sometimes.
Right.
And I want people to understand that. I would say horrible. I was hurting so much inside, so I got vicious. But yet, I remember one time.
And I remember those days when you'd lock yourself in your room or something like that. But like I said, I think because we had the conversations, and it kind of just forced me to say, like, okay, she's not actually angry. You know, she's having a bad day, and then, you know, a few hours would go by and things would calm down, and it would be okay.
Right. And Nana did a lot. You know, she had to do a lot because I couldn't function. Everything was on Dad. And Nana, when she was here in the summer, she'd do all the food shopping, and I could cook when I wasn't real bad, or she would do the cooking. I couldn't have done it if she didn't come. I had a lot of help. Or even when you were still in high school, I gave my car to Robbie across the street. He was a senior. You were, probably in the 8th grade?
Robbie's 4 years older than me, so he was...
And you were in 8th grade. I gave Robbie the keys to my car. I couldn't drive it. We were going to give it away. So I gave Robbie the keys. I said, the car is yours for senior year. He didn't have a car. I said, it's yours for senior year. You ought to drive my kids. Just drive him to school, bring him home, and if they have errands to do, take them. That's how we got through that.
And then kind of the same thing when I become old enough to drive. I got a new car, not a new car, but a nicer car than a 16-year-old probably deserves, because I had to get Leanna from school or you know, go.
Well, so even just to get your permit, just to get me out of the house while you were getting your permit, I knew you had to get your permit. You know, when you got the permit, I knew you had to get that license. So there I was sick. You're driving around. I'm petrified, but at least you're learning to drive. Mm-hmm. Then you get your license, and it was, thank God, that took a lot of pressure off of Dad. But yeah, you got a better car because now you become the one. If I had to go out, you would have to drive me, and you were very good about that.
Yeah, you couldn't have given me a crap box because I did have to get, you know, to Newton every day to pick Leanna up after school or to go shopping or whatever it was. And I think by that time, I'm 16 years old, you're very emotionally intelligent with what's going on with you and, you know, your struggle coming off benzos. And,
right. I've talked to Professor Ashton, the Ashton Manual, the chapters have come from my book. You know, now we're getting them out there. You know, it's becoming something for people to use. Instead of working on my book, which I was trying to do, and all the information I collected, we decide it's just going to get out there. So
I think if we've learned anything from what happened with us, it's, you know, don't hide your withdrawal from your kids if you have kids and it's coming off. Like, make them part of the process,
right?
And maybe they can help you with it.
Right.
It happened to work out well with us. I know with other families it hasn't been.
Right. There's a lot of resentment. I mean, so what do you resent? I can tell you one of the things that I know you resent.
All right, you go first then.
Yeah. I know you resented people calling here all the time because we could be sitting watching a movie and a benzo person would call. I drop the family. I go to that call because I know they're suffering, and I would talk to them. And that went on for years. It could come in the middle of the night. It could come anywhere. And I dropped everything for them. And you guys hated it. So and I know when you first really resented it, even though you said it all the time, when my brother had his son and we were all helping to raise him, you said to me, don't do to him what you did to us. Do not, you know, be on the phone, you know, and you're trying to raise him, don't do it. And so I actually was very good about telling people not to call when I was with him, and which is why here we are doing podcasts.
Yeah.
Why are we doing podcasts?
So do you want me to answer the podcast
Well, let's go to
question,
resentment. Let's go to resentment. What do you resent? Because there are a lot of people out there whose kids resent what they went through, and they're not talking to their parents. It's not right.
Yeah. So I think you're right. It becomes, I think the way that you dealt with your withdrawal was to be on the phone with a lot of people. I think at some point it made you feel better to be in contact and have that sense of community. Mm-hmm. So, and I think we can tell from the podcast you're pretty long-winded when you get on the phone. So, like, it wasn't unusual for you to disappear for 3 hours talking to somebody on the phone. And, you know, that's frustrating to a 15-year-old who's trying to get the attention of his mother.
Right. We lost time. We lost time from me being sick. Then as I was getting better, we were losing more time.
And I think people will point out, they'd say, like, oh, well, you must have hated that your mother never like went to a parent-teacher meeting or anything like that. And I don't think that's the case with me. Like, Dad tried to be at all that stuff, and I remember, like, there were a few times where we'd be driving to the parent-teacher meeting, and, and Dad would be just like, hey, are you getting good grades? Yes. He's like, all right, do you want to just go to dinner then? And we'll tell Mom that we went to the parent-teacher meeting. Yeah.
I never knew that.
Yeah, I think we went to the Ground Round a few times and had Sundays. And,
wow, interesting. But I was good with going over your papers or typing stuff up. Like, I could function
part
in
of
the
my
house.
education, but just you were never going to be in the school or
no sports. Didn't care about sports.
Never joined the bakery sale or anything like that.
No, I could bake, but you
weren't going to be.
I wasn't going to be there. I actually remember one time I was going to be at something and I was so sick I had to call up and say I couldn't come. I was really going to try to be at your high school to do one thing. I thought I can just do it. I can get through for a few hours. And no, I couldn't do it. I felt terrible. I had to bail. So there was never any trying to volunteer after that. So, all right. So let's get into why we're doing the podcast. Because years ago, in fact, up in the closet, we're sitting here in the office, I can still see the program that I bought. We were going to be doing phone interviews and recording them and getting a DVD program out. And life just gets busy, and I couldn't do it because back then I really wanted a whole international effort to show what was going on. So now you say, because again, we're trying to wean off of the phone calls.
So with the DVD series thing, I think we always thought that was such a good idea that you were going to be on tape and you could share all the information that you've gotten that you didn't have when you were coming off yours. But, looking back at it now, it would have been a bad idea because it would have been so cost prohibitive and it would have cost a lot of money to produce those DVDs and then people would have to pay for them.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know if you remember, I had a big company approach me and said they would do it, but they wanted the rights to the Ashton Manual and it could no longer be free. I said, absolutely not. Absolutely not, because the Ashton Manual always had to be online for free, even though we had the Benzo book project, which was set up originally to help support websites.
Right, but what I'm saying is at some point, somebody would have had to charge for those DVDs, and God knows how much they would have cost, because I don't think it was ever your intention to make any money off of what you were doing. It was just, let's get the information out there.
And I knew this guy was going for big bucks on it.
Right, he wanted to make money off of it.
No way. So big company, no way.
To charge people like $70 for a set of DVDs would have been ridiculous.
He would have gone for a lot more than $70. I know he would have.
I'm just making up a number.
But that's why most of us go broke. We can't work. We're trying to spend anything to get ourselves better. So I knew that was, even though he said he had a huge database, he could get it out there, no, it had to be free, in any way. The only thing I like is for the Ashton Manual does bring money into anybody that had a website, to help support it. We were all paying for everything out of pocket. So, all right, so now in comes the
years
technology.
Later now, we have podcasts and, we have the luxury of sitting in your house right now with one microphone and a laptop and able to produce a podcast that we can put on iTunes, and anybody that wants to listen to it can listen to it for free, so... it's been great.
Yeah. So
hopefully it will continue to get better, even though we haven't been good with producing episodes as quickly as we'd like to.
Well, right when we got them out last year, Dad got sick, so everything was done and gone until we did something for World Benzodiazepine Awareness Day as to where I've been. And then you were getting a new whole program here, so because people know you're the manager here, I know nothing about computers, just what anybody shows me. So I'm going to ask you this. Do you think that me going through this made you a better listener, made you kinder and more compassionate?
Yeah, I think I said that kind of when we're talking about, when I was in my teenage years, you had to be able to read your emotions on any given day. So I think, that's something that, like any skill, you work on it over time. And, it's something that I think I've taken with me into my career that, when people do call our office, sometimes we're dealing with them on the worst days of their life. And, I can understand where those people are coming from. So I'm able to maybe be a slightly better listener than the average person is.
Right. I mean, even today, I know you watch me to make sure I don't get overwhelmed doing too much. Wouldn't you say? I mean, because back then...
that comes from experience with just being around you, because I think... you always think that these are great ideas and we'll take on all these different projects, but
Right.
then the reality is they can be overwhelming.
Right. Well, I can remember years ago, people had said they have waves and windows. When I would have a window, when I felt good, I'd be doing everything, and you'd be like, Mom, don't do it, because you're going to pay the price and you'll be in bed crying and sick for days, which I was. And I tell people all the time, don't overdo when you're better, but how do you not overdo when you can feel life again? I'd want to clean, or I can get out of the house today, or whatever. But so here's maybe my last question, unless there's anything you want to say. I want to ask you, what would you say to somebody else that was the child of a victim of tranquilizers, whether they're young or adults now? Because there have been many relationships that have severed as a result. Even friendships have severed as a result of what we've gone through, because it was real, what we went through. When we needed people the most, they walked away, or they got angry, for what we went through.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because everybody's situation is a little bit different as far as what, how they treat that person in their life. So I don't want to say that, you need to be a little bit more patient with them or whatever it is, because God knows what it is that the person who's coming off is putting the other person through. But, it really is. It's a patience thing, because you're not dealing with somebody thinking clearly all the time, and that's really the best I can say is patience, kindness, compassion.
Yeah. Yeah, it is true. It is a game of patience. I've always said that. I'm honest with people. It took a very long time for me to heal. I made a lot of mistakes, so you guys had to put up with it for a long time. But we are one of the lucky ones. We came out okay. I hope other families, eventually they'll heal as a result of it. And some have actually learned when a family member walked away and then they actually experienced it. And there they are firsthand, and then they go to that person that they treated terrible. So compassion and listening, I think, is the best thing, right?
Yeah.
All right. So I think I'm going to thank you for being on the podcast show today, that you're going to have to now go edit or do whatever you have to do, because this is when I walk away and I'm done.
Our first in-studio interview.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Garrett.
Hopefully we're going to have a lot more.
Yeah. Hopefully we're going to get a whole bunch more out
soon, and we have a lot of stuff scheduled right now that.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll have
Yeah, we've got some really good people that are going to be on, some very good stories, some professionals, some very good topics to talk about too. All right. Thank you, Garrett.